Hi everybody, I'm David T. Smith from the Craft Distilling Expo, and this is an exciting panel that we're doing in conjunction with the IWSC, and it's on luxury and sustainability in packaging. Beautiful bottles for gifting and all sorts of things in luxury spirits. If it's a fine spirit, it deserves a fine bottle, but what's the environmental impact of that, and how can that possibly be addressed? We've got a super panel here. I'll let them introduce themselves, starting with Anna.
Hello, I'm Anna Lopes Cardoso. I work in Portugal, actually, with Cork Supply, meaning that we are cork manufacturers, and I'm here also as an R&D representative because that's my role, R&D activity.
Beautiful. Margarita?
Hi, my name is Margarido. I'm also based in Portugal, and I'm the general manager for Talis, that is our bar top brand. We produce closures for spirits.
Kieran?
Hi, I'm Kieran Healey-Ryder. I've just come back from Denmark, where I was talking about this topic with the World Whisky Forum. I work for whisky makers Whyte and Mackay, but also heavily involved with industry bodies around all things sustainability.
Rosie?
I'm Rosie, head of MPD at Atom Brands, dealing with all things new products.
And a judge for some packaging competitions as well, I think, Rosie.
Harper's, yeah, and a couple of others. So, yeah.
And Colin.
Hi, I'm Colin Hampden-White, and I'm a journalist. I make TV shows on Amazon, The Three Drinkers, and I also write for Club Analogique and judge on the IWSC.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Colin. And we'll start with you with the question of what is luxury?
I think luxury is very personal. For one thing, luxury could be something that just simply isn't a necessity. I think if you're not very well off, then a luxury could simply owning a cognac. If you're exceptionally wealthy, a luxury might be Hennessy Paradis or Hennessy 8, for example, something that's thousands of pounds. So I think luxury is very personal. And how luxury is presented is, I think, a very important thing, and is also becoming more personal.
I think that's a good point. I guess you see with brands to an extent, there's a price point and a shift, and it does depend on what the category is. Whiskey will be different to gin, will be different to cognac or tequila or something. And you do kind of see at this point, there does seem to be a flick of a switch, and it's suddenly where things are not just a bottle, they come in sort of packaging and things like that. Does anyone else have any particular thoughts on what luxury is, or why that perception of luxury is important?
I think, price points are important. So as you say, in different categories. So you might take gin, and you have a £40 bottle of gin that has quite a big, heavy, expensive bottle. You translate £40 into the Scotch market, and that's sort of almost the base level for single malts, especially. So you might have a much more simple bottle, especially for the independent bottlers. So I think category does matter, and what for one category is premium or even super premium can be baseline for another.
I agree with that. I think from my perspective, so the IWSR, so the International Wine and Spirits Organization, for whom we all rely on for data, talk about status spirits. And I think that's really interesting because it speaks to occasion and the attitude from the consumer to the product around how and when they're going to enjoy it. And for me, I think how and when you enjoy a luxury product is very, very different. For me, luxury is more of a feeling, and it's a recognition that there are times when you come together that are special, and there are products and or clothing and or food and drink that are a marker of that moment being special. And working now in the alcohol beverage space and previously working with organizations like Jumeirah and in the West End in hospitality, very much that experiential aspect is really, really important. And I think that's, when I look back over the kind of past 20 years, I feel a little bit like luxury, particularly in the West, got a bit lost. It became slightly obsessed with how it looks and became a bit showy and a bit bling, if you like. And actually, at the end of the day, when you talk to consumers and people that were collecting and or drinking these things, it is ultimately about how that product makes them feel. And now you see a more modern luxury consumer and more modern brand marketing trend come through, which is a bit more simplistic, quite humble, and really much more focused about authenticity. And that's the point to which I think sustainability is really, really interesting, because it speaks to the consumer's attitude towards the product.
Is there, oh, sorry, right, we'll cut that. Anna, please.
Yes, I will just like to share some thoughts regarding the packaging here, how important it can be in the luxury experience as well. We talked about the feeling of the consumer, and indeed the packaging is the first thing consumers see, right? So it's before they sample anything. The way it looks, it's really something that tells about the luxury standard or the perception that Colin just mentioned. It's very individual. So I believe that the packaging plays an important role here also for the definition of what the luxury is, and provides, well, by definition, more than just the physical protection, right? So while choosing the way the material, the product is presented, decision taken regarding the packaging is really important. And then later on, we can attach that to the sustainability as well, because many options are available. And sometimes not necessarily luxury and sustainability go together, but more and more we find these options and find this need of combine both. And the packaging, in our point of view, in my point of view personally, can really be a game changer, can be a communication factor for the consumer there.
Well, that's I think it's a great point, and actually it leads us on to another thing, which is, I mean, we talk about the perception of luxury. What are some of the things that are typically perceived as being luxurious when it comes to a bottle? I mean, this might be something that everyone wants to chip in on, but, you know, say weight might be one. I don't know, Rosie, if you've got some thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, in my experience, you know, if you pick up a bottle, if it's got a heavy base, it generally sort of feels more high end, more premium. And then you've got the other end of the market, which is sort of very lightweight, very, very thin glass, and very sort of much more on the sustainable end. I feel like there's sort of a gap missing in the middle, where you've sort of got like a semi-light bottle or something like that, which could be utilised in the sort of luxury end, but also in the lower end, and sort of have a bit more of a happy medium. I mean, in the great scheme of things, if you're spending a big amount on a bottle and the bottle's pretty, you are more likely to keep that rather than throw it away as well, right? So if you can make something which is beautiful and has a secondary use, then that's probably the sweet spot.
Yeah, I was just saying before we started, I happened to have 2 identical bottles of single malt Scotch. At least looking at them, they looked identical. When you picked them up, they were different weights. One was retailing about £80. It was a 13-year-old. One was £120, about 19-year-old. And the difference between the two, the 80 and the 120, the £80 one was 670 grams, and the £120 one was 980. So it was like another 50%. Kind of just shows how much, even within essentially a £40, it's one example, even within a £40 range, how much weight that is. And of course, that is extra resource that needs to go into it. And then the disposal is there as well. And then, of course, the shipping is another aspect too.
I saw an interesting thing very recently about, that was almost sort of taking the mickey around the whole packaging thing, where a bottle of gin was being sold on the continent, and it was in a very simple bottle, and the label just said gin, and it was being sold for £1,000, and people were buying it. And because there was almost a sort of thing of, and there was basically very rich people buying it, but it's, I know I'm having the mickey taken out of me here, but I'm still going to buy it. And it was almost, it was a status thing in itself, having this very simple product with a simple product inside it. Let's face it, gin's not very expensive to produce. And it was just interesting seeing that take form even now, where we're only really getting to the grips of discussing packaging and sustainability. And they were almost sort of ahead of the game.
I think the notion of only just getting to grips is a really important point. And on a conversation Rosie, Dave and I took part in earlier in the year, I said this, and I want to say it again, we'll say it all the time, is that nobody has all of the answers. And the notion that we're on a journey. So within Scotch, we're talking about 2025 when we adopt and move to what I call green packaging. And it doesn't necessarily mean it's all recycled content, but it can be recycled, etc. But I think coming back to David's point about the weight of glass, I mean, I think that's probably the foolery of marketing, and the notion that if you look back at wine in kind of the 80s and 90s, and Colin knows I say this, but the wine industry and journalists in that space and brand marketers in that space really did a really great job of overcomplicating the thing. And the way that the story was told, it was really, really hard. So shoppers started to look for kind of shortcuts, and the weight of a product is almost a shopper shortcut for quality. But I think that consumers, certainly I would say, particularly in China and Europe, I'm not so sure about the Americas, are becoming more choiceful. They're more educated, they're upskilling what they know about life, and they're much more interested in the story that and the life that that product has had, which is really why I'm really interested in what Anna has to say around Cork, because every element that makes up that weight, consumers are more interested in where it come from. And the wonderful thing about luxury is you have a wee bit more time. So in mainstream retail, you probably don't have much time, so it needs to probably look, you've got a few seconds to really persuade someone to buy it. Probably 3/4 of that shopping is going to be a gift, maybe a little bit less in wine, but certainly in spirits we think the majority of people buying for somebody else. So if it weighs more, sure, it probably needs to be worth more. But in the luxury space, you do have more time. And there's this whole kind of theatricality around the buying cycle and the way it's positioned, and the drama and the theatre and the the pompousness of it, that gives you a wee bit more time to tell more stories. So from a sustainability standpoint, I do see consumers care a lot more about where it's come from, how it's made, is it made well. I don't think at this point are necessarily all that bothered if it's truly a sustainable product. They're much more interested is if it's a sustainable maker, and is that maker giving back to their local community. And when you look at those UN development goals that frame most people's sustainability strategies, right up there is partnerships, local economy, circular economy, giving back to communities. And I think for us as craft producers, and thinking about the topics of the conference for David, very much craft for me is about being really responsible where you are, employing people, doing good in your local community environment. I think that within the luxury space is really coming through in Europe and China now as a really big part of what consumers care about.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. I think that there's a beautiful segue, thank you so much, to talk about the premium side of closures. We alluded to it very briefly earlier. Anna or Margarido or both, whatever your thoughts are, we'd love to hear them.
So I can jump on this one in terms of the choices. I in parallel with what you saw on the bottles, I believe that there is something similar on the closure. So as more weight at the top is, or as more, at least the perception that we have is that people tend to look for something more expensive, more with more weight and more shiny when we are talking about luxury. But I also completely agree. And for me, I didn't give my input, but luxury is also an experience much more than just a product. So it's the entire experience of the consumer. With the world changing, I think there are a lot of options to still maintain a product, a luxury product, offering different things that not just what I said before. At the same time, we still see a lot of demand for these type of products like metal, Zamac, tops, these type of closures. Natural cork, a lot associated with very premium products as well in comparison with other closures. But yeah, we are also seeing some change to biggest concern on the entire journey, so the entire process of the product, and now we can create value and still address value to the product, being more concerned with the environmental and social impact. So we are seeing a lot of customers changing a little bit the materials that they are using, concern about type of glue that we use for assemble, but we still notice these trends of being heavy, being different, being shiny. I think that is still part of the game, changing a little bit, but still part of the game. I don't know if you have the same idea, Anna, but
yeah, just my words would be like sustainability has been kind of discrete and a discrete aspect on luxury materials, but today it is also a quality element. Whether it's environmental or social, it's definitely an important element for the quality. So it tells about the individuality, and each person, each consumer will look for specific aspects on the sustainability side as well. So I just would like, maybe later we can discuss that in a little more detail. But one thing that strikes me is also that the consumer is looking for different ways of sustainability, right? We don't have a formula. We don't know exactly what this
Depends
specific
on the
person
product.
looks for, exactly, and the consumer himself. But what we need is to make the customer or the consumer find that he has an impact, that his choice will impact the world, so economically wise and also socially wise and environmentally wise. So that's for the communication people, I think.
And one thing that for me, sorry to just to finish the idea, super important is that I think that a lot of consumers they see or they trust in the luxury brands, so they believe that they will make the best choices for that product because it's a luxury product. So I think we as companies, we have a huge responsibility to present and to provide the best choice possible according to the products, because obviously that is not a specific formula. It depends on the product that we are giving to the market. But I believe that we have a huge responsibility, because I think consumers a lot of times they truly believe in luxury brands because they think that they will do, they represent the luxury, so they will do the good and the right choices. So I think we have a big role here as well to educate consumers and to help providing products that make sense.
Do you think then, in terms of the consumer making a choice, that we will get to a point where you can have exactly the same product and, let's say, a luxury scotch or cognac that was in a standard bottle and it costs, I don't know, maybe £5,000, and then you've got the luxury equivalent, same liquid, but in a beautiful bottle where you have to pay £7,000? And the consumer then has to make a choice of which they're going to buy. And I'm not quite sure we're there yet with the consumer, that they're going to make the right choice and buy the ordinary bottle and put it in a nice decanter that they've got at home.
I think there are a lot of ideas around buying something that is a luxury product, and the status quo and I read a sentence in an article that I really liked, defining what is luxury. That is a blessed, each purchase is a blessed moment. We were laughing about that the other day. But I think people really feel that. So, and it's an individual perception. I think it will be really, even for the brand positioning, can be also difficult to have that choice, because then how can the brand define itself? Do I care about sustainability just sometimes, so I have this product, but if you don't want to care about sustainability, you have this one? I think that can be tricky and difficult. And what I see happen more and more is try to around what is each brand positioning, making the best choice possible. So, and try to guide the consumers to understand what we were saying before, the full experience and the full chain of the production of each product. But yeah, I agree with you. I think we are not ready for that yet.
We'll bring in Rosie at this point, because of course one of the brands that Atom has is both boutique whiskey and boutique rum, which certainly, you know, some of the liquids that we're talking about, the ages, the rarities, and the price points, they are definitely, you know, in the hundreds of pounds. They are in that realm. But for those that are not aware, they are in a standard. It's a 500ml bottle, I think. It's a standard off-the-shelf 500ml bottle with a relatively straightforward closure, with a bespoke label that's been done with particular view. But I'll let Rosie tell. She'll do a better job.
Yeah, I mean, so yeah, boutique as a brand is it's sort of relatively simple in terms of its secondary packaging. It's a full color printed label, no special finishes. It's a natural cork with a foil on the top, all black foil, and then it comes in a secondary presentation box, which is carton board. You can flat pack it. It's relatively easy to recycle. But some of these whiskies that we bottle under boutique can actually trickle into sort of 4 digits. So I think we've sold a couple for over £1,000. So that is, as an experience, if that's something you're spending, I would consider that sort of luxury. That requires the consumer to have knowledge around what's actually inside the bottle. And I would say the people that are sort of buying into that sort of brand, it requires them to have that knowledge, but then also it is also a treat, it's luxury because of what's inside the bottle. But then you have sort of other brands which, you know, that sort of product, you would sell it for more anyway because it's got a beautiful box or whatever. But I mean, boutique as a brand is very much about the liquid, so it's not relying on packaging to catch people's eye.
And Rosie, you also did a Grand Cru. I know it was a sort of special product for Atom Labs, but that had a slightly different approach to it as well in terms of the bottle. Can you tell us a bit about that as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So that was basically we took Grand Cru Burgundy, we distilled it and we made gin out of it. We then bottled that into a Burgundy bottle with a cork, and we seal it with wax. And then with that, we provided a decanter which we had drawn onto with permanent pen Grand Cru gin, and that was a decanter that came with it. So it was really beautiful, and I personally think quite well packaged, but that was again a really high-end gin. It was very expensive in terms of the gin category, you know. It was up there with the probably the most expensive sort of 5 or 6 there are.
Colin, you got some thoughts?
I was just wondering, actually, this is my ignorance, with a 500ml bottle, what's the glass to liquid ratio? Is it higher than a 700ml or the same?
I think, I don't know, but my instinct is it would be higher because the depth of the base, I don't think actually proportionately decreases. So I would imagine actually you're probably getting more glass to less liquid in terms of the ratio.
And that's something that could then change in the future, one would presume.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. Yeah, we were talking about closures, and I know, Kieran, when we had our previous conversation about closures, which hopefully there will be a link below, we essentially came to the conclusion that because of the mix of cork or composite and metal or plastic and the way that the recycling schemes work across the world, basically you can't really recycle them. That was largely the conclusion that we roughly came to, but that is where we are at the moment. So my question is there an argument to say make the closure a bit fancier so people definitely want to keep it rather than throwing it away? I will give one example which I found here, but many people will be familiar with. This is the Blantons, the whiskey. And they have these little horses, and there's lots of different shapes, and they're designed to kind of be collectible. And I wonder if you might see some of those more luxurious brands do something like that. So actually then the thing is collectible rather than just being chucked away. Any thoughts on that?
I mean, I so much agree with that, because when I was working in the West End in theatre hospitality, 9 times out of 10, whatever grade of ticket people had, they would keep the cork from their champagne bottle. You know, and then that was more years ago than I would care to remember, to be honest. And then moving forward, you look at the Dalmore 3035, which does have a specific bespoke crystal decanter with a stopper. Like, those stoppers do have cork on, but are actually things that people hold on to. So I do agree with that. But I also think I think it's 3 months since we spoke, is it? And in that time, there has been progress towards separating out the constituent parts of the closure, which is brilliant to see. But I mean, you asked us coming onto the call to think about what are some of the challenges, and I still kind of stand by what I constantly seem to be saying, that actually the local legislation in whichever market you're sending your product into is, for me, by far and above the most complicated thing, because it confuses where you start and how you start. And so if you're a distiller or a craft brewery listening to this, like, the most important thing is, where do you want to sell your thing? Because actually that's going to dictate what you need to have in your product. But yeah, you're right. I do think stoppers can be collectible, and I think that speaks to all kinds of drinkers, not necessarily just the enthusiasts that are totally in love with your brand. And therefore I think that could be quite interesting.
Anna or Margarita, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I can just jump in with a few ideas. First of all, I agree with that part of the recyclability, and maybe we can add something special to the closure, so that instead of just throwing it away, can be used for other purposes. So there would be not a single use, but multiple use. But I would just like to add also that the world is talking too much about the end of life of packaging. When indeed what we should care about is the full cycle of the product, from the source to the end of life. And sometimes it does not justify that we recycle something at the end, just because all the other parts of the chain are so good that the benefit of recycling does not really impact anything good. In the cork is a bit like that, a little bit like that. For example, if we think about the carbon footprint of the different closures, carbon footprint of any cork closure is so low. Actually, it's negative. It means that it's contributing positively to the environment globally. Okay, even if it's not recycled. So indeed, it's seen. We should look at some materials like a carbon trapping system, right? So why recycling? Why should we care about recycling? Even if we don't have it as a collection material, but still it's something that is completely harmless. I would say, rephrase, maybe not harmless, but even beneficial to the environment globally. The best choice. We already talked about that. It depends on the individuality, on the luxury style that we want, on the market, as Kieran was mentioning. There are many challenges regarding the end of life of the packaging. It's very confusing. I would say that the consumer is still, even as technicians, we are still not at the point of understanding which is the right way to go. A lot of this information was generated because of the issues related to the plastics and all the accumulation of these materials of synthesis in the world. And then we tend to apply the same rules for different materials, which is not exactly what we should, but it's the best that we know so far. So there's a lot, I would say there's a long way to drive still, to have a clear idea and to have a good communication. The other factor that we didn't mention regarding the importance of communication with the customers and the luxury as well is transparency. And there's still, my point of view, there's still some lack of transparency regarding the environmental side and even the sustainability side globally.
I just want to 100% endorse what you said. I've been in so many of these conversations over the past few years, and I've not heard anyone from your sector talk about that. But I think it's really what I think that speaks to is the need for us as an industry, whether it's beer or all alcohol, to be more consistent in what we're saying, because that's a 2-minute brilliant explanation of the problem, but we don't necessarily have that opportunity outside of, and this is when I say this as a storyteller, but the value of your storytellers is just like immense, and the ability to change minds and to solve these things. There is an element of, do general public think we as producers always want to do the right thing? I think within the craft space, more than mainstream space, I think people just assume we want to do the right thing, and every MPD Rosie produces. And to come back to your gin release, I did think it looked beautiful, so I just want to reinforce what you said earlier. But I think the notion that we as producers aren't necessarily always doing the right thing is kind of in the way a little bit, and I think that's where values are important, and just communicating that we care. Just as a starting point, we're a producer, but we do care, just leave it at that, and then move it. And then things like the closure are easy. I wanted to ask you a question, Anna, actually. Do you feel like we as producers are giving more time and placing more value on the value you guys add to what it is that we make? Do you think we're now having to spend a bit more time with you and understanding where you can add value to what we're trying to do?
On the technical point of view, I think there's a lot of demand for information, for sure. But I don't feel we are still at the point of really communicating clearly and having transparent communication regarding sustainability matters. Being this said, also, we cannot only speak about the product. We need to speak about the companies. The same as for the distilleries. There are distillers and distilleries. And for the cork manufacturers, the same. We cannot also either just sit on the fact that the cork is beautiful. We need to have sustainable companies, sustainable vision, to be really keen, more than keen, to demonstrate that we are committed with sustainability. Because of the product is already sustainable, but because our practices will preserve it. And one thing is for sure, sustainability is not only about environmental. We have to be sure about that. We need to be more efficient, to be economically sound and to make our business grow as well. So when we speak about sustainability, we are not just looking at our product, we are looking at sharing our sustainability goals with our customers as well. But for your question specifically, if I understood, if we are already like discussing and elaborating the options with you, maybe Margarida has a different perception, but I don't still feel part of the pocket.
I agree with you. I think we have a lot of demand from the market. And what we can try to do sometimes is to respond very fast. I think Cork Supply strategy is a little bit different. So we felt the need last year, beginning of last year, to create a specific department for sustainability. And we are defining and doing our strategy along with the market. That is super important, and I believe is a strategy for the R&D, for example, as well. Work with our customers. Because as Ana Cristina was saying, it always depends on the product. It depends on much more than the product, like the idea of the brand, what the customer wants, etc. So I think we have a lot of concern from the market that we didn't feel a couple of years ago, but we are not still in a stage where we are working together to make the best decision possible for that specific project. And that for me is the most important part. It's not like one solution for all the products that we sell. It's not, it depends on a lot of things. Even the brand positioning is super important. We cannot say that it's not, because it is. It's what is selling the product at the end, is how the market will accept the product, and that is important as well. If we want to pass any knowledge on sustainability, on natural products, etc., we need to make sure that the message will get to the final consumer. So I don't think we are in that stage yet. And I think it's really important that we start to work along with customers, not only to sell, to be a real partner in like doing a line strategy in what regards sustainability and product design. So both.
It feels to me like we're not necessarily always asking the right question, and we're maybe not we're not asking an open question. I exclude Rosie and I from that, because I know that we do ask a different question.
We always try to be technical, to be honest with you. A lot of times people say, you cannot say that to a customer. And we're like, yeah, we can. We are like, we have to. Is our role here is to be transparent and be clear. And if we cannot do something, we will explain why, and we will try to find the best solution of what we have in our hands right now to do. So we always try to seek for new options and new materials and new ways of doing things, but we are also sometimes the supplier that says that doesn't make any sense. Or at least we try to, being polite, obviously, but we try to.
Just a couple of points, David, on that, and then I will mute my line and pass back. I think the brief today was to talk about the luxury sector, and when I kind of look through what makes a luxury brand, there's always some kind of a design classic. You know, we might say it's the King Alexander for Dalmore. You may disagree, but that's kind of our design classic in that sense. You know, Balenciaga as a fashion designer had a nipped waist, and therefore all of the items that he created as a fashion label, you know, that's a design classic. Rolex has the oyster design clock face, and actually, speaking to what Anna was talking about, and it needs to be right for the brand. Those are all things that were, you know, design classics because they came from a place of truth and they were doing something for what they believed was the right thing to do. And I think that for me is where sustainability is really interesting. And Colin and I were chatting a while ago now about Fetterken as a distillery, and actually for Fetterken, we're not necessarily talking about the packaging in your hand. We're really focused on local sourcing, replanting of trees, and our Scottish oak programme, which goes into the casks that hold the whiskey rather than the bottle. That is the thing that eventually the consumer holds, because for Fetterken, that just, it's in the garden of Scotland, and that feels like absolutely the right thing to do for that brand. But that isn't necessarily what we would do on Tamla Doolin, and that isn't necessarily what we do on Jura. So I think it's that brand truth for a luxury brand is much more important. And my final point is, in terms of agency of change, I don't know how long you guys have all been in the industry, but about 15 years ago, we had a thing come through that was called the Modern Slavery Bill in the UK. And that spoke in fashion to brands needing to be certain that every element of their upstream supply chain was responsibly sourced. And that was a huge amount of change. And it was only, and we knew it was an issue. It was in the news. There were various companies that had been called out by newspapers for doing the wrong thing. And eventually it took Tesco in the UK to put in a policy that forced all of the clothing brands and all of the food brands to move with the change. And it was Tesco that made that change. But it didn't really necessarily touch the luxury space. It feels to me like for luxury brands, consumers need to be the architect and the vehicle of the change, whereas in the mainstream space, retailers are kind of the thing that make that change for us. And Carrefour globally is probably the leading retailer. But for luxury brands, I think we're waiting on, like, consumers are informed enough to know that it's complicated, and they are patient enough to know that brands are on a journey. And I think when consumer attitudes change is when the luxury brands will really start to feel the need to move forward. And that's the point, come back to Anna and Margarida, that's the point where these open conversations are really helpful, because then you've got a bank of conversation that might help you develop stuff. I promised I'd pass my mic back, and I'm going to mute my line.
Right, well, thank you very much for that. I think we've very comprehensively covered the closures. So we'll move on to a little bit on the label, but also the secondary packaging, because we're talking about heavier bottles generally. Maybe there's decoration and things on the bottles. They're talking about the closures, they're shiny or heavier, or these, more luxurious. But quite often, once you get to a certain point in whatever the category might be, you start to talk about secondary packaging, whether that is cardboard box, whether or not that is one of these tubes with the metal on the sides, or a more fancy ornate wooden box. I will very briefly say my pet peeve on cardboard the boxes that you sometimes get, which is if I bought something online and it arrives and I go to take it out and the bottle falls through the bottom of the cardboard carton. To me, like, just get rid of those for a start. Just get rid of those, or either make them proper so that they fit properly, or just get rid of them, because they are a waste of time. They go straight in the bin and they can't be recycled because they've got all shiny stuff on it. That's my rant over. Colin, it's over to you.
I think that with the cardboard boxes, you could pretty much do away with them in most circumstances, especially if you're buying for personal consumption. Anything that is being sent out for personal consumption does not need a cardboard box. It goes straight in the bin. If you're buying something as a gift, then you might want to have the choice to be able to give it in a box. But I mean, there are big brands that are already sort of doing that in terms of Johnny Walker, for example. They're doing away with boxes. Hennessy, they're doing away with boxes. I think for their VSOP, you don't get a box until you get to XO. That's coming very soon.
Spot on.
And I'm sure that there are a lot of Scotch brands that are either doing that already slowly without shouting about it, or are pretty much following suit, which is a good thing. But I think also when you were talking about the different, especially with tubes, you've got two materials there, and that's really unnecessary these days, I think. And also cardboard packaging doesn't need to be so thick even if it's for gifting. It just needs to look pretty. So there's a lot that is being done, I think, already, but that can be extended as well, right to the very, very top end of the market, where you've got NFTs, for example, and you're buying an extraordinarily expensive product, but they won't create the product until you want to take ownership. So nothing has been produced.
There we go. There's the future. Your non-fungible tokens. One of the issues with the non-fungible tokens is a lot of them seem to be fungible to me. They actually do seem to be a physical thing. Anyway, we won't get...
Yeah, and I think hopefully that will change, hopefully, in that it doesn't need to be a physical thing sitting there, not even being seen by anyone. It can be something that is created when somebody takes ownership. I think that's starting to head that way, and I think that's a good thing.
Rosie, when it comes to, I mean, this is probably slightly more on the other side of Atom with Master of Malt, when it comes to some of these secondary packaging, I know you're talking to me a little bit about maybe the unforeseen implications of shipping for a lot of online retailers.
Yeah, so for example, if you've got a bottle of whiskey or gin or whatever, and it comes in a box which you can flat pack, you just go like that, put it down the side of an airbag, fine, you're not increasing the shipping at all. But as soon as you buy 2 bottles, which come in a tube each, you are doubling your footprint. So you're going from a box which holds 2 bottles to a box that holds 4 bottles and just shipping air for the sake of it. Okay, you could put something in place which says, don't send me the tubes, I don't want them. But the producers still made them. They're just going to go in our recycling as opposed to yours at home. There's, I think, giving the consumers the choice in these instances is definitely the right thing to do, but also in terms of like not making it premium just because for the sake of it. But I do think there are other aspects of the industry where people are sort of guilty of doing that. For example, might be in some instances a lot easier for a buyer to get a listing for something if it comes in a pretty presentation box. It might be easier for them to get it on the shelf in a shop, for example. So the person dealing with that person might say, right, I need a box for that to be able to get it on the shelf in that market. Well, why? Do you actually need it? Is it just because it's an easier sell? So I think there's so many different facets to it, but that's just one thing which I've experienced sort of fairly recently.
That's true. I think from a brand's perspective, and I think Master of Malt is an outlier because they're a progressive organisation that are generally very open to doing things differently. The other e-tailers are available, but the trouble with mainstream retailers is pace, and it's the same as us as producers. So whether you're whiskey or cognac or champagne, like it is a lot longer to produce our product than it is, say, beans and nappies. And I think therefore the way that we respond to the sustainability challenge is complicated because it takes time. The whiskies we're producing now were bottled 2 decades ago. So as a result of that, the packaging we're producing now was, the decision probably wasn't made 2 decades ago, but it was certainly made longer ago than I worked in my previous life working in a different category. And so for us, it's slow. And alcohol, for whatever reason, I'll give you a reason. Alcohol was penalised by legislation in most markets because the consumption of alcoholic goods has other challenges in health and societal impact. So governments around the world have put in all of these constraints. That meant alcohol under indexes for online sales. And there are very few online retailers in the world for alcohol as compared to offline. So offline is driving the ship. It's making the decisions for us. And yes, Master of Malt, Whisky Exchange, whiskyshop.co.uk are all doing really well, but they're still relatively small compared to those equivalents in sports, for example. The online space is massively behind. So alcohol is just behind. We need to find a way of cutting through some of these decisions, and definitely don't want to be shipping air as a result.
Yeah. Any other thoughts on the general shipping side of the secondary container? I mean, I guess when you're talking about something very, very fancy that comes in a wooden box or something like that, where you're talking something that's thousands, again, it's potentially one of these things that you might keep. I know I can't think of the name of it now, but there's the new very fancy like 100th or 120th anniversary maraschino. And one of the things I really liked about that was there's like an insert bit which holds the bottle in place that you can very easily take out and get rid of, and then it's like a leather, sort of looks a bit like a binoculars case, and you can use that for something else afterwards. And I really liked that there was this idea that they actually thought about how can actually this be used to something afterwards. Same with like a box. If a box has got that sort of, I mean, it wouldn't be very luxurious, but that sort of molded plastic with the like faux velvet on it, and you can't really take that out very easily. It's difficult to reuse that box, but if you can, great, and then you can reuse that.
I think that these very, very expensive products are less of a problem actually, because there's very few of them produced.
Exactly.
You reduce a Johnny Walker back bottle by 5 grams, and that's millions of bottles being reduced by 5 grams. That has an impact when it's being shipped. So I think that it's the mass, which I know we're supposed to be talking about luxury, but it is that sort of more mass market luxury of Blue Label, for example, that would have a huge impact. And I'm sure a Blue Label could drop a few grams.
Yeah, I mean, it's like not naming any names, but you go to a supermarket and you might buy, because it happened to be on offer or something like that, and you buy a single malt Scotch for £24-25, and it comes in one of these tubes with the mix of the cardboard and the metal, and you think, I just quite like the whiskey, actually. I bought it when it was a good price. I don't need these tubes at home. And yeah, there is an element of that. But I think you're right, that really, really high end, very minimal impact. But that kind of, well, maybe depending on where you are, because I mean that's sub 30 I was talking there, but that up to sort of £250-300, I think there's a chunk that could be done there. And from what Kieran was saying, it sounds like work is being done on that as well. So we have this conversation this time next year, and I think we'll probably be a bit more.
I'd honestly love to talk in detail about that particular point, but I think there are two very big single malt brands that meet David's description, but they are brands that are over and above sold as gifts. And so when you gift something and you are posting it yourself, to have a secondary tube has purpose. And I think at the high end, when I think about some of the work that happens on Macallan or Bowmore or Dalmore or Hennessy, I think at the top end you're talking about not just the bottle, but what we call the glorifier, but the display unit. And for us, it comes back to purpose and making certain that how it's presented has purpose and life. And it sounds self-aggrandizing to say it to you guys on this call, but it is about creating something that's a piece of art that can live in its own world. But I do think so we are all informed consumers, all in the industry, and I think our expectations are probably different to the mainstream, and it comes down to what does the consumer want, and our research would indicate that they still want in vast numbers that secondary carton. So the task is to work out how to make it as green as possible.
I think so. Right, well, I think that's a good time. Did anyone have any final thoughts that they were like, I must say this before we finish?
I just want to touch on, I think, how we can come in a sort of full circle in terms of the storytelling and luxury and sustainability. And I think there's the part where now you're seeing more brands who are actually creating a more luxurious product by focusing more on sustainability. And that might not be in packaging, maybe it's more in how it's produced, but actually creating that connection between everything that's a part of the product, having the time to be able to tell that story. And actually then you can sort of tick a lot of boxes within that. But I'm not talking about the sort of luxury that's the 0.1% of people. Right, that's a very different type of luxury, but as we've discussed, luxury is subjective, right? So, yeah.
Brilliant. Well, I'd like to thank.
David, can I just say one final thing, which I've been holding back on, but at every opportunity I speak this year, I think it's really important that we as industry have a combined conversation around sustainability and tax and excise. And one of the biggest challenges facing this industry worldwide is tax. We are penalized because we're seen to be premium, and it cuts aside from our contribution locally in terms of employment, in terms of the good work that we do, and for us as agents of change. In the UK, £3 out of every £4 is going to Westminster in its coffers. And if we could fix tax, we would be unlocking investment that will allow all producers to go more quickly. And that's connected to why I think the work that this conference is doing and the IWSC are doing and Club on Logique are doing, I think we all need to just invest a wee bit more time to come together. And certainly this has been brilliant for me to learn from you guys. I think we need to see industry talking together to solve some of these bigger change. And if we can solve tax, all of the sustainability challenge becomes easier. When you look at what Rosie's done through her MPT, or we've done, or Anna and Margarido have done, there's really good stuff happening, but we're completely constrained because government in almost every market we sell alcohol in doesn't recognise the fact that we can do good and we genuinely care. So coming together at this conference to me is a fantastic opportunity to share the good work we're doing. And that's the end of my impassioned speech.
It was well timed as well. Thank you very much. So I'd like to thank my fantastic panel. It's been really, really interesting. There's always much more we can talk about, but I'm sure we will have another discussion. If you've got any thoughts of future discussions, then pop them down in the comments, please do. And thank you for watching, and thank you to the IWSC as well. And we'll hope to see you soon. Cheers.
Pleasure.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.